Softr is one of the leading applications for building internal tools and portals for your company. Softr got its start as a front-end application builder for Airtable, allowing large teams, customers, and contractors to access Airtable data without paying the hefty per-user license cost for each person normally associated with Airtable. One of the most beloved features of Softr compared to its competitors is the ability to build a single application for both internal and external users. In fact, you can even make public-facing pages, set SEO settings, and have your apps indexed by Google. That's led both solo entrepreneurs building marketplaces and MVPs, as well as seasoned companies building internal tools to embrace Softr. But Softr's future direction is centered around these companies building internal tools. It continues to expand its backend data sources to include Google Sheets, SmartSuite, HubSpot, and BigQuery, and rolls out features like global data restrictions to make it easier to handle permissions across your apps. Hi, I'm Dan Lehman from AutomationHelpers.com, and we help companies like yours get automated by creating portals, apps, and integrations to your business applications. If you haven't gotten started with Softr yet, you can do so using the affiliate link in the description below. Now, I know these videos can tend to be a little bit on the longer side, so we've included timestamps if you want to navigate to the part that's most important to you. Before we dive into building an application itself, let's go ahead and take a look at Softr's pricing and just see how it's positioned in the marketplace. So here I'm on the Softr pricing page. You can see that this is pretty standard in terms of pricing. We've got a free plan on the low end, and we've got a custom enterprise plan on the upper end, and we've got 3 plans in between: basic, professional, and business. Now, the part I have to say is that Softr has one of the most generous free plans out of all the no-code applications that we worked with for businesses. And here's a couple reasons why. The first one is that they don't limit you on the number of applications that you create and publish. So if you're building a number of applications for your business, maybe you have a CRM, a project management tool, employee onboarding, you don't have to worry about the number of apps that you're creating. You're not paying additional for that. That's huge. Another thing is that even on the free plan, you're allowed to have 5 collaborators. A lot of other companies say, hey, you can only have 1 person working on this if you're on the free plan. If you want to collaborate with other people in building your applications, then you're going to need to upgrade that. But in this case, we can even have 5 people on the free plan. And of course, that goes up as we scale up our plans. This is another huge one. Having a custom domain on a free plan, I think, is virtually unheard of. Oftentimes, you're paying more to get a custom domain to have your own branding. What's also great about Softr's plans is that you have the ability to have internal users and external users on the same plan. So an internal user would be people at your company. So in our case, we're automation helpers. If we have people on our team who are accessing our application, they're not a collaborator. They're not building the application itself. But if they're users of it and they're interacting with it, those individuals would be counted as internal users. So they're sharing that same domain that we're all on. Now, external users are going to be people outside of these domains. They might have personal email domains like Gmail. They might be from other companies. So think of people like your clients or contractors. In this use case, we'll be talking about a real estate example. And so we have people who are looking to purchase homes. Those would be external users inside of Softr. So with such a generous free plan, what are some of those reasons that companies choose to upgrade? Well, one is around the number of users. So especially if you're utilizing this heavily with your internal team, you'll have up to 100 users, which is on this business plan. And so especially if you're a larger organization, you're going to upgrade simply to have those additional user counts. You can see these external users, this scales really quickly. So if you have a large number of clients and contractors that you're working with, to be able to have 10,000 on the business plan is pretty cool. Another reason you might choose to upgrade is because you want to have more control over permissions in your application. So things like action permissions, who can actually click buttons and take certain actions. You've got some basic options. You can say all logged in users can do this, but you're able to get much more granular with additional permissions for custom user groups on those upgraded plans. You'll also notice that for the blocks or the components that we have on our screens, on our pages inside of Softr, that some of them are restricted by the plan type that you're on. So some of these, like conditional forms, which are coming out, won't be available on free or basic. They'll start on professional. So I'd say, to be honest, most of the clients that we work with, most businesses are usually opting for professional or business because of some of those limitations, but it's not to say you can't get a good start on your application using free or basic. There are three main ways that we can use to create a new application in Softr. One is to use their AI tool to be able to generate an application. Another is to create an application from a library of existing templates. And our third option is to take our existing data source that we have and build from scratch a new front end on top of that data that we already have. So I tend to be a little bit picky about all of the AI features that companies are rolling out with, but this is actually pretty neat what Softr is able to do because it generates both the metadata and it makes images and a landing page and the data structure on the back end and user groups. So it really does a lot with a single prompt. So in today's use case, we're going to talk about this real estate portal where we have different properties that are listed, and we have maybe external viewers who want to take a look at the properties, and then we have clients that we're working with and agents as well. So let's go ahead and preview our application based on this prompt that we're giving it. And now it's come up with an app name of Casa Catch. We'll probably come up with our own app name here, but this works for us. Let's go ahead and generate our app. Okay, our app's ready. Let's see this in action. Okay, so you can see it's generated a little logo for us. We've got a sign-in screen, find your dream home today, an image generated, start house hunting. Let's see if we click on that, what happens. Prompts us to log in here. So we could log in maybe as a client. And now we see our logged in user page. We can see some different properties that are available. If I click on this, does it open anything up? Looks like we have a listing for an individual page. We don't have any photos here, but it's really interesting how it's able to generate this automatically for us. Now, if we wanted to, and we felt like this is a good enough beginning structure and we want to modify this, we could go ahead and customize the app. So here this opens up Softr Studio, and if I go to connect the users to this and sync with the data source, then here you see the only options that we have are Google Sheets. This doesn't actually work with some of the other data sources like Airtable, which is actually one of the most prevalent data sources. So because of this restriction, we're actually not going to use the AI-generated version of this app. Next, let's take a look at templates. So inside of Softr, you can create a new application, and there's a lot of different templates to choose from. You'll notice that there's these different icons of which data source that they work with. So a number of them work with Airtable. Google Sheets is the second most popular one. So you see a number of these, and they're categorized by things like portals, internal tools, dashboards. You can pick these. This allows you to preview it ahead of time so you can look at the different screens before you actually commit to creating this application. But despite all of the great options, honestly, most of the time when we're building internal tools and portals for our clients, we're starting from scratch because we're gathering their requirements, we're understanding what they're needing, and Softr makes it so easy to be able to build on that we're not really saving a ton of time by using an existing template. That's just our own personal opinion. Do what works best for you. In fact, you might find as you're getting started, templates are really helpful to get started with, but as you mature as a builder, then you might find yourself building from scratch. So for the bulk of today's video, we're going to build from scratch using Airtable as our data source. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, Airtable and Softr really have gone hand in hand for a long time. Softr is now maturing to include other data sources as backends as their ecosystem continues to evolve. But for a lot of people, Airtable is still the #1 backend for Softr because of its automations. And so in this video, we'll continue using Airtable. So here, just to give you an idea, we've got this real estate base that we've set up in Airtable, and we're keeping it really simple in terms of the number of tables. We just have a table for properties. These are going to be what we want to have people view inside of our application. And then we have contacts, and these contacts, some of them are going to be clients and others are going to be agents. And so we have two different user groups who are able to access our application. Let's go ahead and start building our Softr application and connecting it to Airtable. In order to do this, we're going to click on New Application, and from here we'll choose Blank Application. We're starting from scratch. Right now, I'm going to actually uncheck List and List Details because we're just going to create our own, but I like that it's giving us this initial structure here of our sign-in, sign-up pages, our home page, our reset forgot password, user profile, so we'll keep the rest of these and create the application. Now, sometimes when you're getting started, it's helpful if you have access to the same data yourself. So we're going to make this available as a free template. You can come over to our website at automationhelpers.com, make a copy of this so you can start building along with us at the same time. So now we have a blank application and we have a basic homepage here. This area where we're editing everything is called Softr Studio. This is where we make all of the configuration changes, add our users, do everything we need to on the back end, and then we'll be able to see our application on the front end and be able to interact with it as well. First things first, let's go ahead and title our application. I'll call this Real Estate Portal. And you'll notice right off the bat that sometimes you're like, wait, why are there two of these widgets or blocks that look very similar? So in this case, we have our menu or navigation, and we have two different versions of it. You can see if we hover, this is available to non-logged in users, and this one is what logged in users see. And that's kind of the theme throughout the whole application, is that we can very easily configure who sees what in our application, both from a logged in and logged out user standpoint, and we can apply more granular levels of permissions as well. Now, before we get too deep in the weeds there, let's just set up a really basic landing page for our real estate portal. We have this hero block that works for us. Blocks are the underlying components that we're adding to our pages. So this one is a hero. Right here, we've got a feature grid with different features. We can add headers and footers and things of that nature. Now, this is all static information. So right now, we're not pulling this from Airtable. We'll talk about that when it comes to the actual properties itself. But right now, this is more just like building a landing page or using another web design tool. I'll just add a title here, Discover Your Dream Home. We're going to remove the subtitle. Down here, we've got our call to action. We'll change this to Browse Properties. Let's change our image here. We'll click on this. Now, we could do an asset generator. I think for this one, we'll just do a stock photo. I'm just searching for fancy kitchen, and we'll use this asset. But of course, we could upload our own images as well. I want to make this dark, so let's change our styles, and we've got our background color. Here we can choose a darker color, and then we'll change our title text by clicking on that little paintbrush icon, and here we can change our font color. Now you'll see that we have a number of style settings that we can apply at the block level. There's also a section for theme where we can apply more broader things to our theme, like our fonts that we're using and different primary colors. So we've got this blue accent color. On this image, maybe I just want to round the corners a little bit, so we'll change that. And that's looking pretty good. Now let's add another block below it. And here we have options for different blocks, static and dynamic. I'm still going to stick with these static ones as we're building out essentially this landing page. So static, you can see we have options like headers, heroes, features, etc. I'm just going to search for a hero block here. Let's go ahead and do this hero with call to action, which is, I think, the same block we were using up there, but we're just going to simplify this one. I've inserted a little copy here, and one of the things that we can do in our title is we can actually use this curly braces and reference the name of the logged in user, so it feels much more welcoming when it says, "Welcome, Dan," as opposed to just, "Ta-da, you're logged into the application." Let's change the text color again of this to white, and we'll do the same thing with our subtitle, change that to white. I'm just going to remove this image altogether. We'll scroll down, and instead of request a demo, we'll change this to contact agent. We'll go into our styles, and let's change that background color again and make that dark as well. Okay, so this is looking pretty good, but presumably we don't want to display both of these blocks to logged in users and logged out users. This first one, Discover Your Dream Home, let's say we want to make this available only to people who aren't logged into our application. So I'll click on that block, go over to visibility settings, and this will say is available to non-logged in users. And then we'll click on our second block here, and this one is going to be visible only to logged in users. Okay, at this point, we should be able to preview this on the front end. Now, one thing we want to do is make sure that we're connected to the table of users that we want to have of people accessing our application. Let's go ahead and click over on users. And in our case, because we're using Airtable as a backend, we want this to have a bi-directional sync so that the people who are users or contacts in this table now have access to our software application. Or if someone registers in our software application, it writes their user record back to Airtable as well. Now, you don't have to do this step. You could just have users be directly in software and not sync this bi-directionally with Airtable or your data source. But I find that this really makes the experience a lot better for most of the builds that we do. Let's click to sync with the data source. Now here for our data source, we're going to first choose the connection that we have. You'll be able to authenticate, and that'll walk you through the steps of adding it for the first time if you haven't done it. But I've already authenticated with Airtable, so I'm going to choose that connection or the data source that I have. And now that gives me the options to be able to choose which base I'm using. I put this in brackets here just to make it easily accessible up at the top. So I've got this real estate one that we're using. And now we choose the table. Of course, we don't want to have the properties. The properties are what we're going to view. It's the contacts table that we're choosing. Now we can map our user field. So this will tell it which fields are going to connect directly. So our email is mandatory here. We'll choose that email. We've got our name. We've got an avatar. So this would be the portrait or image of that user. We've got a field for magic link. I just created a URL field here. This is really nice if you're adding users on your side and then you want to send people login information. You don't want to send plain text passwords or anything like that. So a magic link you can just trigger automatically they'll get a little link in their email, and that lets them authenticate automatically. We can add created and last seen dates if we want to as well. And for our default authentication mechanism, we're going to use Magic Link. Let's go ahead and save and sync our users. Now, Softr does have a little getting started user guide, and so we're kind of hitting on all these steps here, but sometimes this will pop up, which is helpful if you're getting started. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. So now our sync is completed. We can refresh this table, and we can see these users. And again, these are the same exact users as the people that we have in our contacts table over in Airtable. And so if I add a new contact record here, then this is going to sync back here. If I add a new user here, it's going to sync back to Airtable. Now, while we're here, let's create a couple of user groups. So we'll click on this next tab for user groups. This is to help us with our permissions. We'll create this user group. This first one we'll call agents. And you could have an option to add users manually to this. Most of the time, I like to automate this with conditions. So we can say if their user type is, and then here's where we can say agent, and that maps back to our user type in Airtable. And you can see we have agents and clients. Then they're going to automatically be assigned this agent role. And we can do the same thing with our clients, add them based on conditions. User type is client, and we can save that. And I'm going to publish my app for the first time. You see that we've got a custom subdomain, but we can add our own custom domain as well. Let's go ahead and publish this. And now let's actually try just previewing our application. This is going to open up a new tab, and we're going to be able to see this and impersonate different users in the application. So remember how we had that top hero section, and we said this is only available to people who are not logged into our application? Well, right now we're previewing this as a non-logged in user. Now we could toggle this and choose a user on the list. This is going to give us a little warning that this will actually update live in our data source. I'm just going to click this to not show it again. And now I'm viewing the application as Amber. And you remember, we're not seeing that first hero, we're now seeing the second hero. And this is actually referencing her name because she's logged in as Amber. Now we see that. If we change this to another user, now it's going to reference their name. It's doing this dynamically. Okay, let's go ahead and add a block for our footer. If we want to add a block, you can see that we've got this little plus button. We'll click that because this will be at the bottom of the screen. We'll search for footer. We'll use this footer with links. And now we need a logo for our company. Normally you'd have your own logo, so I'm not suggesting you use AI for this, but it's kind of a cool little feature. So let's click on our image. This time we'll use the asset generator. We'll give it a prompt, a simple logo for a real estate company. Let's try that out. I like the second one, okay, so let's go ahead and use that asset. And the nice part is that we can reuse these assets. So if we click up at the top with our logo here, we could update that image and use that same asset so we don't have to re-upload it or regenerate it every time. Click here and we'll update this as well. Now I think we should slightly update our menu, at least to reference that we have properties or listings. So in order to link to that, we'll want to create that page. So I'm going to open up my pages and let's click to add a new page. We'll call it properties and give it the URL of /properties and press save. Now this is empty for now. That's okay. We at least have the page structure so that we can go back into our home page. Now we can modify our navigation. I'm just going to keep this simple for now and remove some of these additional options. We'll label this properties, and then we can choose from our properties page. And we'll want to do the same in our navigation for our logged out users as well. So we'll strip a couple of these links, change that to properties, and again, link that to the properties themselves. Now, the cool part is we don't always have to be publishing every little change that we make. In this preview area, we can just simply click to refresh this, and this should now reflect our new navigation that we have. Now, before we go too far down the rabbit hole of building out our property listings page, let's talk about our user flow. So you remember when we were building the application from scratch, we had the option to generate the sign up and sign in screens. We can access those if we go in our pages and we can go to our sign up screen. Let's click on the block that we have. Since we already have our logo up top, I'm going to remove that. You may or may not want users to sign up with Google, so you can toggle that on or off. And the user has the ability to switch. If they actually meant to sign in, they can click on the sign in screen. Let's go back to our home page. And from here, let's just double check in our navigation where we have that sign up button where it says sign up. It looks nice, but it's not actually connected to anything. So let's use that to open the page. And from our page, we can choose our sign up screen. Let's go ahead and publish this. And let's test the functionality out of our sign up flow. So if I'm here and I want to sign up, I'll put in my information for those 3 fields, agree with our terms and conditions, and let's test the sign up flow. Great, so I was able to sign up and that logged me into the application for the first time. And now if I click back on our users, I should see that new user has been created. And if I go back into Airtable, we can see that the user or the contact record has been generated here as well. So that's one way to handle the users, that they can actually sign up and then create their own accounts. And that use case makes sense for this real estate company because there might be external visitors to the website who haven't interacted with us before, who then want to sign up for an account, and we can allow them to do so. But if you're creating internal applications for your team, you might not necessarily want to just have anybody be able to sign up and give them access. So here inside of Softr, we could add a user, we could put in their email and name, and then this has the option to generate that magic link. So we can add a single user here or bulk import them. Here I've put in my test information to generate this magic link, and let's add the user. And now we can have it automatically send them information with their magic link as well. So we can invite them now. Now this information is actually templated. We can configure this. I'm going to go ahead and send the invite. And this is what that email would look like if we don't actually modify the template itself. But we can modify the template if we click on settings, and then we can go to user notifications, notification templates. And this would be the invite email via magic link. And here's where we can change the information that actually goes out to that user. Now you'll notice that there's this Softr branding. This doesn't need to be visible to your users depending on the plan that you're on. So we can go to Settings General. If we click on Settings again, go to General, scroll down to Softr branding, and we can toggle off the Softr branding. You'll notice that also toggles off the floating badge. So in the lower left-hand corner, it says something like created by Softr or Softr. We can turn that off and save our settings. Let's keep working on our property listings page. So we'll open up our pages and this time go to properties. Now this page is very empty. We have our headers and our footers that stay on all of our pages, but there are no blocks. So we need to add our own blocks. Now before on our homepage, we were focused on static blocks, things like the heroes that we used. But in this case, we want to focus on dynamic blocks. That is that we want to actually have the data be coming from inside of Airtable, where we have all of that nice property information. That's what we want to render on this screen and let our users interact with it. So I'm going to open up list here because this is a list of records, and Softr has been releasing some nicer looking updates to many of its blocks here. So we can see there's this updated one, this beta one for grid. We're going to use that, check it out, see what it looks like. So let's add this to the page. Now, because we're using a dynamic block, that means we need to connect the block to our data source. And it might seem a little bit cumbersome to connect this each time, but the power of Softr is that you can actually connect different blocks from different data sources. So potentially I might have some data living inside of Airtable like we've talked about, but maybe we have Airtable record restrictions in terms of the number of records that we can have. And so we've actually coupled this with Google Sheets. Well, we could actually connect to data both from Google Sheets as well as Airtable. So even though this is a little bit of an extra step here to connect it each time, it offers up that additional flexibility. So I'll choose Airtable. We'll have our real estate base. This time our table will choose properties. And now you can see that automatically mapped a couple of our fields. So instead of just having that dummy data, instead it's showing the names of those properties. The images are still a generated image. It's not actually pulling from Airtable. So we'll change that in a moment. Let's click on our content. And here, if we scroll down, that's where we can see this cover media. And this is a media type. We could do image or a video. In this case, we are going to map this to the image that we have. We called this the thumbnail. Already looking much better here. Now we've got this little tag that displays in the upper left-hand corner. We have this mapped to our type. And I think that works for now. We've got residential, single family. I don't know. These probably aren't great labels, but they work for the purposes so you can check it out. We've got our name here of the property. And for rooms here, maybe we want to change this. Instead of rooms, let's look at the number of beds and bath. 2 bed, 2 bath. And I think in this case, I'm actually going to remove the label. And if we want to add another field, we could do that, add additional fields. Here we'll choose text. And let's map this text to the suburb that this is a part of. Again, I think we'll just remove the label. Okay, so this is starting to look okay. You'll notice that we have a search bar as well as filters. So let's update that content. For our filter, let's say we want to filter this by the number of beds that we have. But unfortunately, this kind of filter is only available for single select, multi-select, and link record So I'm going to take this number field that we have for bedrooms. Let's edit this and convert this to a single select. We'll update that. Now we should be able to sync those with the data source, and we'll change the label of this to beds. And we could do the same thing with bathrooms as well. Let's just convert that number to a single select. We'll save that, and we'll change filter to, this will be baths, and we'll change this to bathrooms and sync it with the data source. Now it seems like there's maybe a bug or something funky happening here as we're in the studio, but this should show up correctly on the front end. Now, if we look at our properties, we've got these filters, and we could say, okay, we want 2 bedrooms and we want to have 2 bathrooms, and that will filter this appropriately for us. Well, how about search? Well, let's say I want to search for, 606 Willow Street, and I start typing in 606. It did nothing. It's still showing all of the results here. And that's because we have to make sure that we're actually hooking up the search to the individual attributes of the record that we want to search against. So let's scroll down to our search bar, and we can search by our different attributes that we want to select, and we can choose multiple of them. So let's search against the property name, and then maybe we want to do the city name as well. We can choose what we want, and now we should be able to search against those attributes and pull up the relevant records. You'll notice down here that Softr is recommending that we create a details page for properties, which is a great suggestion. So essentially when we click into the details of this, it has its own dedicated page. So let's click this button, and I'm going to choose this newly updated details page. And so right off the bat, it's trying to map things the best it can. So it's got our name, it's got a description. Let's go ahead and finish mapping this. Let's go to our content. Again, we need to change that cover media, and we'll select thumbnail. Maybe I want to make this a little bit larger, so let's change that cover media, and we'll change this to large. We want to add a little bit more rounding to it, and then we can go ahead and map the fields that we want. Okay, so we've done a little bit of mapping now to get some of the information we're looking for, and if we go back over to preview this, we can see now it's looking a little bit better. We've got the information that we want. We've got a nice little gallery here of photos, so you can click, it expands it. You can click through the different images that you have. And now I think it would be helpful for user retention if we add some related properties down below. So maybe check this one out, and instead of clicking back and searching for properties again, maybe we display to the user some additional properties. So in Airtable, I have a field called related properties, and this is just linking properties to other similar properties. And then I've created a lookup, which is now displaying the related property IDs. These are these unique identifiers behind the scenes for each of these records. So essentially, I've got this property ID here, which is my record ID. And then in my related property IDs, this is a lookup where I'm just referencing. We've got that related properties, and we display the property ID. The reason we're doing this is so that we can tell it conditionally. We can have some conditional logic to say, okay, well, if this property exists in these related property IDs, then those are the ones that we're going to show on the page. And let's use our new list component that we were just using before. And so we've got our data source mapped out. Let's hop over to our content. And again, we want to change that cover media so that we have our content is going to be that thumbnail. But this time we don't want to display all of the properties, and we don't want to have the searching and filtering. We'll do that on the main screen instead. So we can scroll up on our content, and we can just delete these filters because we don't want to show them. And we can toggle off our search bar as well. And we don't want an action to create the record, so we'll delete that. Now, if we click back on source, this is where we can add conditional filters. So we're going to add a filter, and this is what we were talking about back in the Airtable base. Let's search for our related property IDs. So if that related property ID includes any of, and now we're going to choose the context of our current record. So we'll choose our current record, and then we'll look up property ID here. And this isn't going to necessarily reflect this correctly when we're editing this in Softr Studio. But if we hop over to our preview screen, now we see those related properties. So this is really nice. It shows those 3 additional related properties. We've got our images, we've got our information up top. Now, the one thing we want to do is take a look at these action buttons. So I think it makes sense that we add a couple different actions that allow our users to interact with the properties that they've found. So let's click on that first block and click on the Actions tab. And I'm going to remove this third action here, delete that. We're actually going to deal with the second action first, and this is going to be to favorite one of these records. So let's open this, and instead of an action to open a URL, we're going to change this. And we're going to use our one-click update record here. Now, this is possible with some improvements that were made on the Softr side to understand the kinds of fields that we're selecting. So what I did in Airtable is I created a linked record between the property and the contacts called favorited by, and this is a many-to-many relationship. If we edit this, we can see that this is linked back to the contacts, and it can be linked to multiple contact records. So inside of Softr, that's the field that we want to update, favorited by. And in this case, we don't want to replace the existing value. So if we had one user who favorited this property, we don't want to replace them and override that. Instead, we want to add ourselves to it as well. So instead of replacing, we are going to add an additional value. And the value that we're going to add is now based on our logged in user. And this is going to be the record ID of that logged in user. Let me head back into Airtable on contacts. So in Airtable, this is going to correspond to that hidden record ID in the background, that unique identifier that we talked about before, but this time of the contact record, because that's who's logging in as that user inside of Softr. Let's change this success message, and we'll have this be added to favorites. And then let's scroll up, and instead of calling this update, we'll change this to favorite, and we'll change the icon to be a heart icon. So let's see what this looks like in our preview. Let's refresh to get those latest changes. Okay, and right now I'm logged in as this Olivia, and we'll click to favorite it. You'll see it says added to favorites. And then in Airtable now, if we're looking at Olivia, we can see that there's this 606 Willow Street that's now added to our favorites list. On the inverse side, we can look at the property and see which individual users have favorited that property. Now, just to show you that this works to have multiple people be favoriting it, let me click and change this to another user like Amber, and she'll favorite this as well. And now in Airtable, we'll see there are two different users who have favorited this one property record. So that works for a secondary action to favorite that property. But of course, real estate agents want you to actually go look at the property so that you'll buy it. So our first action should be, let's tour the property or get a hold of our real estate agent. So there's many different ways that we could handle this, but I just set up a Calendly link as an example. And we're going to, instead of share a link, we're going to click on adding this to a website. And I'm just doing this to show you some advanced functionality that you could do. We could do this inline embed. We'll press continue, and I'm going to copy this code so we can add this to Softr. Then back in Softr, let's go to our pages, and we'll add a new page. We'll call this something like tour the property, and save. And then this time for our blocks, we're going to search for the custom code block. Nothing's actually going to show up right here. I'm going to delete the sample code that we have and then paste in that Calendly widget. Then we're going to publish my changes. We'll head back to our pages and go into our property details. We'll click on this first block, and we want to change that primary action. So we'll head back to actions. We'll put our tour page, and let's change this to a modal. We'll update this to a CTA, something like tour property, and we'll add a little house icon. And let's go ahead and refresh our page again. And now we can click the button to tour property. This should open up a modal with the Calendly link in it. Now we could get really advanced, and we won't do it in this video, where we actually pass some data into our Calendly link. So if we want to send the property or the property ID, and then we could use Zapier, and we could take the information from Calendly, pump it back into Airtable, create a special list view that we have inside of Softr. I mean, you can see how there's so many advanced things that you can do. We're just really scratching the surface of what you can do with Softr. Now let's just do a couple housekeeping things. We'll want to go back into our properties page here. And when we click on one of those records, we want it to open up the actual property details. So for our actions here, we've got these options for item on click, and this is going to open up the details page and property details. So just make sure that's set up the right way so that when we're on our properties page, we can click on that individual property and it actually opens up the correct details. I, of course, am a goofball and didn't even put the price of this on here, which is pretty silly. So instead of suburb, let's go ahead and change this to be price. So that makes a little bit more sense here as we're looking at our listings page. Now, if we go back to our main homepage, remember we had this little hero stuff up here, and then we had this sections. We can delete this section. We don't need that anymore. But this is where we could display our favorites, right? So we've got our listings page of all the properties, but when we click that button to favorite a record, It added the data that we needed to Airtable, but it didn't do anything on the front end. So let's change that. Let's add a block. And again, we'll search for list. We'll choose that new grid that we have. So we would do all the exact same steps to map this the way we want it. And then if we go to our source and come down to conditional filters, inside of Airtable on our contact record, let's add a new contact ID field. This will be a formula, and we'll just input the record ID here. And then back on properties, we want to insert a field here. So we have that favorited by relationship. But let's do what we did last time and add a favorited contact IDs with a lookup. Now we're going to choose this favorited by relationship, choose a field. This is going to be our contact ID that we just created. Let's create that. So these are going to be the IDs, the record IDs of the different users, this Olivia and Amber, who favorited this. We're going to use this back in our conditional logic. So in our condition in Softr, we'll say if our favorite contact IDs includes any of, and again, we're going to use our logged in user, and we can match it based on the logged in user's contact ID. Now let's go into our content and turn on a title, and we'll add this heading of my favorited properties. We'll remove our subtitle. And now when we refresh our preview, we can see as we're a logged in user, if we're a user that's favorited something, now we can see our favorited properties. And so this might make sense if we go to our pages and go to our properties page, that rather than having a user have to actually dig into the record itself to click on that action button to favorite it, maybe it makes sense to have the user be able to click on the list of listings or of property listings rather than having to drill into that record itself. So let's click on our block and we'll go over to actions. And here's where we can add an item button. In that item button, let's do the same thing with our one-click update. And we'll use our same settings, favorited by. We'll add the additional value. We'll choose our logged in user and the record ID, and we'll add the little heart icon here to favorite that listing. Now, when we're on our properties page, we should be able to look at these properties in bulk and be able to favorite a couple of them to add those now to our list. Now, if I click onto my home page, I should be able to see my favorited properties. Now, when I'm looking at these properties, you'll notice that we have this action to add a record. We absolutely don't want our clients adding property records to our listings. This should be something that only the admins or the agents can do. So inside of Softr, if we click on our actions and we have this add record, this we could have open up a form and be able to add that. We won't get deep into the details of adding with forms today, but let's change those visibility settings. So we can say the button visibility, instead of being available to all users, or even logged in users, we'd want to go a step further and say that instead of all logged in users, it's actually going to just be the agents who can do that. So that means if I'm logged in as this client, I don't see that button. But if we change this instead to an agent in the system, the agent would now have the option to add additional property records. And of course, if we were doing this for real, we'd probably be batch uploading these property listings via an MLS database, but you never know. The other thing I want to point out about permissions and visibility rules is we did this here at the block level, and we said, hey, you don't have the visibility to see this add record button. But you know, there's multiple places where we've had the same properties show up. There's the properties page, there's the favorites page, there's the property details page, which references the related properties. And so it can be a little bit cumbersome sometimes to manage all of these permissions and rules at that block level. So if you want to manage this globally across Softr, you say, I never want a client to be able to create a property record. There's a better way to do this. If we go into our users, we can click on data restrictions and we can add a new data restriction. Again, we'll have to map this to our base and we're going to do this for properties. Click next. And we're going to apply this permission to our clients. And then we can add restrictions to say, okay, on create, we don't want to allow users to create a new record. We just toggle that on. We've got other permissions we can do around view, edit, and delete. We save that, and now it doesn't matter where you're showing this in your application. Simply, clients don't have the ability to create those property records. I hope this has been helpful to see just how powerful Softr is for building your own internal tools and applications. If you have any questions about your own Softr project, don't hesitate to reach out to automationhelpers.com, where we're offering free 30-minute consultations.